She could taste blood before she saw it. Metal and dirt coated her tongue. A rough hand pressed her face hard into the ground while a laugh echoed somewhere behind her. Serve the man or starve in the dark. They'd said that every day. 3 years in that cellar had taught her that silence was safer than hope. Maddie stopped begging long ago. It only made them smile. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. That night, though, something shifted. The world above cracked open. Her husband's boots slammed against the stairs, each step louder than the one before. He reeked of whiskey, the belt already in his hand. "You still think you can run?" he hissed. Maddie didn't answer. Her eyes caught a glint, the old pair of rusted scissors near the wooden crate. When he reached for her again, she moved. A gasp, then silence. He collapsed without a word, his body crashing onto the lantern. The glass shattered, fire spreading fast across the straw. Flames climbed the walls as she stumbled toward the door, barefoot, coughing through the smoke. Behind her, the cellar screamed with fire. The house began to die. Every breath was a knife in her chest, every step an act of defiance. Still, she didn't stop. The desert air hit her like a slap, cold, wild, alive. Wind howled across the dunes, lifting her torn dress as she ran. She didn't know where. She only knew she couldn't go back. Hours bled into each other. Blood dried black on her hands under the moonlight. When dawn came, she couldn't tell if she was alive or just pretending to be. Her legs trembled, her body hollowed by pain and fear. Somewhere ahead, she thought she heard water. A river that wasn't there. Through the blur, a shape appeared, a cabin, a man standing outside. For a heartbeat, she thought it was a mirage. She dragged herself closer, one slow step after another, until she collapsed beside a flat stone. The man turned at the sound. He was tall, maybe late 40s, gray at the temples, eyes like winter steel. Caleb Boone had spent half his life running from the kind of man he used to be. His hand went to the rifle near the door out of habit, but then he heard her voice. "Don't stop, please." It wasn't a threat. It was fear. He froze, his chest tightening. Her face was barely visible under blood and dirt. Her hair tangled, her breath ragged. She tried to crawl away, not from him, but from a memory of what she'd escaped. He spoke carefully, slow, low. "Easy now. I ain't gonna hurt you." She trembled harder. Tears cut clean tracks down her face. "I just can't be touched," she whispered. "Not even by kindness." Caleb felt something twist deep inside, something he thought had died years ago. He had seen war, death, pain, but not this kind. This was a wound that lived behind the eyes. He knelt a few feet away, careful not to get too close. "Let me help you," he said quietly. She shook her head. "You can't help what's already dead." The desert wind lifted dust between them. Caleb watched her try to stand, her body shaking, breath short. "I can make it stop," she muttered. "I just need somewhere quiet." The word hit him like a bullet. Quiet. That was why he'd come here too, to disappear, to forget, to bury the noise. And now that silence had found him again, bleeding at his doorstep. He looked toward the horizon. No riders yet, but her tracks said someone would come. He had two choices: let her die, or open his door and invite danger in. Her eyes met his. Green, fading but alive. He sighed, stepped back, and nodded toward the cabin. "Doors open. Come in when you're ready." She stared at him for a long moment, then at the ground. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but no sound came. She crawled forward instead, weak and trembling, into the shadow of his home. Caleb shut the door softly, the sound echoing like a promise neither of them understood yet. Outside, the wind went still. Somewhere far off, a lone coyote began to howl. Inside, the smell of smoke and old wood filled the air. Caleb set a pot of water on the stove, pretending not to look at her. She sat by the door, shivering, eyes down. When he brought her a blanket, she flinched. He stopped a few steps away, set it on the floor. "For the cold," he said quietly. "You don't have to take it." Her fingers trembled before she reached out. "Thank you." 2 words, small but real. He nodded and went back to his chair by the window. The desert stretched endlessly outside, quiet and golden beneath the dying light. Maddie looked at the steam rising from her cup, like it reminded her of something once warm. Then her voice came, cracked and low. "Do you believe in hell?" Caleb looked up. "I've been there a few times." She gave a faint, broken smile. "I didn't mean the one in the Bible. I meant the one a man builds for you, one lock at a time." He said nothing. She pulled the blanket tighter. "I killed him," she whispered. "My husband." The silence between them turned heavy, like truth itself had a weight. Caleb didn't speak right away. The words she just said hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. He didn't flinch, didn't reach for his rifle. He just looked at her, really looked, the cuts, the dirt, the way she kept her knees pulled tight to her chest like she was still bracing for another hit. He poured a little water into a tin cup and slid it toward her. "Drink," he said. She hesitated, staring at the steam, then took a slow sip. Her hand shook so bad the cup rattled against her teeth. "I didn't mean to," she said finally. "It just happened." Caleb nodded once. Things like that usually do. Her eyes lifted to him, searching for judgment. She didn't find any. "He kept me in that cellar for 3 years, she whispered. "Said he was teaching me how to be a good wife. Every night, he'd tell me the same thing, that obedience was love." Her voice cracked, but it wasn't love. It was nothing. She stopped talking and stared at the fire. The flames made her look almost young again, like the light was trying to remind her she was still human. Caleb leaned back, letting the chair creak under his weight. "I ain't much for sermons," he said, "but I know this. Sometimes you do what you gotta do to stay breathing." She blinked fast, tears threatening to fall. "You really believe that?" "I believed worse." She let out a shaky breath. "When he came down those stairs, I thought it'd be the same as always. I didn't even plan it. I just saw those scissors, and..." Her hands flexed in her lap like she could still feel the metal in them. Then there was fire. So much fire. Caleb didn't interrupt. He'd learned that sometimes people needed to say things out loud to stop them from rotting inside. "I prayed," she said after a moment, "even when he laughed at me for it. I prayed for a way out. I guess this was it." He stared into the flames. "You think God answers like that sometimes?" She gave a bitter smile. I don't think he was listening anymore. The room went quiet again. Only the wind pressed softly against the cabin walls. Caleb stood and fetched a small tin of whiskey from a shelf. He poured a shot into her cup. "It'll help the shaking." She took it, drank, coughed, then looked at him with wide, watery eyes. "You don't even know me. Why are you being kind?" He sat down across from her, elbows on his knees. "Because somebody should have been, long before tonight." Her lip trembled, and for the first time, she didn't look afraid of him. Just tired. Outside, the wind shifted. He felt it in his bones before he saw it, the kind of stillness that comes before trouble. He walked to the window, pulling the curtain back with 2 fingers. The moonlight stretched across the sand, and in the distance, he saw them. 3 riders, slow and steady, cutting through the desert like shadows that knew where they were going. Caleb's jaw tightened. "They're coming," he said quietly. Her head snapped up. "Who?" He didn't answer right away. "The kind of men who think they're justice." Panic flickered in her eyes. "They'll kill me." He looked back at her, calm but certain. "Not tonight." He crossed the room and picked up the rifle leaning by the door. The click of the chamber, sliding open, filled the silence. "Stay low," he said. "If they knock, don't move." Her voice broke. "You'll get killed." He gave her a faint, tired smile. Wouldn't be the first time someone tried. Outside, hooves hit the dirt. A deep voice called out, "Boone, we know she's in there. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way." Caleb opened the door slow, stepping into the moonlight. The 3 men looked rough, the kind of rough that came from doing bad things too long. "You boys rode far for a lie," he said, his voice calm. One of them grinned. "Word is, the woman killed her husband. We're just doing what the law won't." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "I've seen what the law does. Don't look much like justice to me." The grin faded. "You hiding her, Boone?" He shrugged. Maybe I'm just tired of men who think they own everything they touch." The man spat. "Then you're standing in our way." Caleb's voice dropped low, steady as thunder before rain. "Been in the way my whole damn life." The desert went silent. Then 3 gunshots cracked the night open. When the smoke cleared, only the wind moved. Caleb stood alone, breathing hard, rifle still warm in his hands. He turned toward the cabin. Maddie was standing in the doorway, eyes wide, tears shining. "You killed them." "Yeah," he said quietly. "Guess old habits die hard." She stepped closer, voice trembling. "They would have taken me back." He nodded once. "No one's taking you anywhere now." Her throat worked around a breath that wouldn't come. "Why'd you help me?" He met her eyes, soft, sad, honest. "Because someone should have a long time ago." The fire behind them crackled, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The sun came slow, bleeding gold across the desert horizon. Caleb stood outside the cabin, boots sinking into the dust, staring at the 3 mounds of dirt behind his home. He'd buried men before, enemies, outlaws, friends, but never like this. Never with a prayer half-formed in his chest, and someone watching from the window. Inside, Maddie sat wrapped in his old coat, hands cupped around a steaming tin of coffee. Her face looked softer in daylight, though her eyes carried that kind of quiet that never really fades. When Caleb came in, she looked up. "You didn't have to do it," she said softly. He set his hat down on the table, a small cloud of dust rising from it. "Maybe not," he said, "but I wanted to." She blinked, unsure how to take that. "You don't even know me." Caleb gave a faint, crooked smile. "Don't need to. I know what it's like to be hunted by your own ghosts." Her lips pressed together. She looked down at the cup again, as if answers were hidden in the black surface. "You ever stop running from yours?" He poured himself coffee, took a slow sip, and nodded once. "Not until today." They sat there for a long time in the kind of silence that wasn't empty, just heavy with everything they didn't need to say. The wind pushed softly against the windows. Somewhere, a bird called out, small and lonely. Caleb stood, after a while, and walked to the shelf by the wall. He picked up a small wooden cross carved from old cedar. It had been gathering dust for years. He hung it back above the rifle rack, then reached down, took his Colt from its holster, and set on the table beneath the cross. His hand lingered there for a second before pulling away. Maddie's eyes followed him. "That gun saved me," she said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe, but some things ain't meant to be held forever." She turned her hands over in her lap, looking at the raw skin on her palms. "I don't have much left to give back," she said. He tilted his head. "Then give what's left." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she took a slow breath, stood, and walked to the small cupboard. When she came back, she held a tiny bundle of dried lavender tied with a thin piece of string. She hung it beside the cross, just above where he'd laid the gun. "For what?" Caleb asked, watching her. "For forgiveness," she whispered. "For both of us." He didn't answer, didn't need to. The smell of lavender spread through the room, clean, light, soft as the sound of breathing. That night, the desert was still again. The sky deepened into a field of stars, and the coyotes cried far away, lonely but familiar. Maddie sat near the fire, eyes half closed, letting the warmth soak into her bones. Caleb poured 2 small cups of whiskey and passed one to her. "To new starts," he said. She hesitated, then lifted her cup. "To peace." They drank in silence. Outside, the wind brushed against the cabin walls like it was finally gentle. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel like hiding from the world. He didn't know what came next, but for now, that didn't matter. The next morning, the smell of coffee filled the cabin again. Maddie moved slow around the stove, humming under her breath. It wasn't a song he recognized, but it sounded like something from before pain. Caleb watched her from his chair, smiling just a little. The lavender swayed near the window, catching the first rays of sunlight. It smelled of something neither of them had dared to believe in for a long time, a clean start. They never talked about the cellar or the fire or the men buried behind the house. They didn't have to. Every morning they woke up under the same roof was its own kind of forgiveness. Sometimes she'd sit on the porch, watching the desert turn gold again. Caleb would bring her coffee, stand beside her, and say nothing. Silence had become their language. Not empty, not broken, just real. Years later, folks in nearby towns started whispering about a quiet ranch where a woman with kind eyes lived with a cowboy who never carried a gun anymore. They said no one knew their story, but anyone who stopped there left with a warm meal, a calm heart, and the strange feeling that second chances were real after all. One evening, Maddie asked him, "You think people like us ever really get to start over?" Caleb looked at her, then out toward the horizon. "We don't get to choose what breaks us," he said, "but we sure as hell get to choose what we build after." She smiled, that small, fragile kind of smile that comes when pain finally loosens its grip. "And what do we build, Caleb?" He turned his gaze to the sky, soft and gold and wide. Something worth staying for. The wind moved slow through the grass. The desert rested, and for the first time in a very long while, so did they. The years passed quietly, the way dust settles after a storm. The ranch grew slower, older, calmer. Fences leaned with the wind, and the barn smelled of hay and sunlight. Caleb still rose before dawn. Same as always. Coffee first, boots next, rifle untouched on the wall beneath the old cedar cross. Maddie sometimes joked that the gun gathered more dust than the Bible, and he'd smile, not because it was funny, but because it meant she could joke again. She had changed. The scars on her wrists had faded, though he noticed she still rubbed them when she was lost in thought. She hummed when she cooked, talked to the chickens like they were her oldest friends, and laughed, softly, but enough to remind him what sound was supposed to feel like. They didn't talk about the fire anymore. Not the cellar, not the 3 graves behind the cabin. Some things healed by being left alone. Instead, they talked about weather, fences, how the desert looked different every morning. Life had turned quiet and small, exactly the way both of them wanted it. Sometimes at night, they'd sit on the porch, the lantern burning low between them. Caleb would sip whiskey while Maddie leaned against the post, eyes on the horizon. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked once. He shook his head. "Spent too long running. I'm done moving." She smiled at that, a tired, tender smile. "Then I guess I'll stop running too." For a while, it really felt like peace had decided to stay. Then one morning, it changed. Caleb was fixing a broken fence post when he saw it, a shape on the far ridge. A horse, dark against the sunrise, standing too still. He squinted, but the glare made it hard to see. The figure didn't move, just watched. After a few moments, it turned and disappeared into the hills. He said nothing to Maddie that day, but something in his chest tightened. That night, he cleaned a rifle for the first time in years. She noticed, but didn't say a word. She only watched, her hand still over her plate, her breath caught between fear and trust. "You think they found me?" she asked quietly. Caleb shook his head, eyes still on the metal. "Don't know. Maybe it's nothing." She stared at him for a long time. "You don't believe that?" He looked up. "No," he admitted, "I don't." The next few days stretched thin. Caleb didn't sleep much. He kept checking the horizon, each sunset longer than the last. Maddie tried to keep the house the same, bread baking, lavender drying, the rhythm of normal life, but the silence between them was heavier now, full of waiting. On the 4th night, the horse came back. This time, closer. Maddie saw it first through the window. "Caleb," she whispered. He came to her side. A rider approached slow, no lantern, no sound but hooves on dry earth. The man stopped near the well, still as a stone. Caleb stepped outside, leaving the door open behind him. "Evening," he said, voice steady but low. The rider pushed back his hat. He was younger, maybe 30, sunburned and mean-looking. "You Boone." Caleb nodded once. The man's eyes flicked toward the cabin. "Heard there's a woman here. Pretty one. Been missing a long time." Caleb's jaw worked tight. "You heard wrong." The stranger grinned. "See, I don't think I did. Sheriff down in Abilene's been asking about her. Says she killed her husband and ran. Big bounty on that kind of story." Maddie's voice broke from behind the door. "Please don't do this." The man's grin widened. "Well, hell, looks like the story's true after all." Caleb's hand hovered near his belt. "You need to turn around." "Or what?" The wind moved between them, whispering through the dry grass. Caleb's eyes didn't blink. "Or I'll put you in the ground with the others." The man's smirk faltered. He looked from Caleb to the cabin, then spat in the dirt. "Ain't worth dying over some broken woman." He turned his horse, spurring hard, dust rising behind him like smoke. Caleb stood there until the sound faded. Then he went inside. Maddie sat at the table, her face pale, hands shaking. "He'll tell someone," she said. "They'll come." Caleb sat across from her, voice calm but rough. "Let him. I'm done hiding." She stared at him, really stared, as if she couldn't decide whether he was brave or broken. Then she reached across the table, placed her trembling hand over his. "You shouldn't have to protect me." He met her eyes. "Maybe not, but I will." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she whispered, "I don't want anyone else to die because of me." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't bring death here, Maddie. You brought a reason to live." Her lip trembled, and she leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his hand. "I don't deserve you." Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ain't about deserve. It's about what's left after the fire." Outside, the night spread over the desert. The wind hummed low, carrying the scent of lavender through the open window. The sound of the rider faded into nothing, but both of them knew it wasn't over. Peace, like everything else they'd built, was something they'd have to fight for all over again. Night in the desert had its own kind of silence, not peaceful, but watchful. The air was thick with waiting, the stars too bright, the ground holding its breath. Caleb sat by the window, the rifle resting across his knees. The lamp burned low, throwing thin gold lines across his face. He hadn't said much all evening. Maddie knew that look, the one that meant he was thinking about what could come through that door before morning. She was in the corner, sewing a rip in his shirt. Her hands trembled so badly the needle pricked her twice. Blood dotted the cloth, small and dark. "You should sleep," she said softly. He didn't look away from the window. "Can't. You can't fight everyone," she whispered. "I don't need to," he said. "Just the ones that find us." His tone wasn't angry. It was calm, steady, like someone who'd already accepted what he might have to do. She watched him for a long moment, the way the firelight softened his edges. Then she set the shirt down. "You think killing them will fix anything?" "No," he said, "but it'll keep you alive." She swallowed hard. "You shouldn't keep doing that. Saving me." Caleb turned his head then, and for the first time that night, looked straight at her. "Why not?" "Because every time you do, you lose another piece of yourself." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth sat heavy between them. Hours passed. The lamp burned lower. The wind began to howl outside, pushing against the walls. Then, faint at first, came the sound, distant hoofbeats. Not one this time. Several. Caleb stood slowly, pulling the curtain back with 2 fingers. Dust rose in the distance, 5, maybe 6 riders moving fast. Maddie's voice cracked. "It's them, isn't it?" He nodded once, grabbed the rifle, and checked the chamber. "Get in the back room. Lock the door." "No," she said, standing. "I'm done hiding." "Maddie." "No." Her voice broke, but held steady. "I've spent half my life being locked behind doors. I'm not doing it again." He looked at her for a long moment. The same woman who once crawled into his cabin half dead, now standing firm, eyes bright even through fear. He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. "All right," he said quietly. "Then stay close." Outside, the riders fanned out, their lanterns glowing like small fires in the dark. One voice called out, deep and sure, "Boone, we ain't here for trouble. Just a girl." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. "You'll leave empty-handed." The voice came again, closer now. "She's wanted for murder, Boone. The law's the law." Caleb's jaw clenched. The law ain't never come this far for justice. Only for revenge. The man at the front dismounted, lantern swinging. His face was young, his badge dull with dust. "You can't keep her. She belongs to the state now." Caleb leveled his rifle, calm as ever. "She don't belong to nobody." The man's hand twitched near his holster. "Don't make this worse than it has to be." "Already is," Caleb said. Then the world cracked open. Gunfire split the air, flash after flash. Maddie screamed from the doorway. Ducking as bullets shattered the window glass. Caleb moved with that old, terrible precision, the kind that never really leaves a man who's killed before. 3 shots, clean and cold. When the smoke cleared, 2 horses ran loose, 1 man groaned in the dust, and the rest rode off into the dark, shouting promises they wouldn't keep. Caleb stood there, chest heaving, smoke curling from the rifle barrel. Maddie ran to him, her hands gripping his arm. "You're bleeding." He looked down. A grazing wound along his shoulder. Nothing more. "It's fine." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't keep doing this. They won't stop." He let out a slow breath, looking at the ground. "Neither will I." She pressed her forehead against his chest, shaking. "I can't lose you." His hand found her hair, rough but gentle. "You won't." They stood like that until the night went quiet again. Later, when she cleaned the wound by lamplight, her hands were steadier. She said softly, "You could have run. You could have left me." He smiled faintly. "And go where?" "The only place worth being is right here." She tied the last bandage, her eyes glistening. "You ever think maybe we were supposed to find each other?" He thought about it for a long time. Maybe we just survived long enough to finally meet. Outside, the sky began to pale with the first gray light of dawn. Smoke drifted across the desert. Caleb stood at the window, watching the horizon. Maddie came up beside him, her hands slipping into his. He didn't look at her, but he held on. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, they always do." She squeezed his hand tighter. "Then we faced them together." He turned to her, eyes soft now. "That's the only way I know how." The light touched their faces, tired, scarred, but alive. For the first time since that night in the cellar, Maddie wasn't afraid of the dawn. The next morning came with that strange kind of quiet that only follows violence. The cabin smelled of gunpowder and coffee, the air heavy but still. Caleb sat at the table with his shoulder bandaged, staring at the untouched cup in front of him. Maddie stood near the stove, hands trembling as she stirred a pot that didn't need stirring. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence wasn't the comfortable kind they used to share. It was sharp, full of everything they didn't know how to say. Finally, she whispered, "You killed again." He didn't look up. "Yeah." Her voice cracked. "Doesn't it ever stop hurting?" He let out a slow breath. "No, but some things hurt worse if you don't do them." She turned, eyes wet. "They were just boys, Caleb. One of them couldn't have been older than 20. I saw his eyes," he said quietly. He wasn't a boy anymore. Maddie's lip trembled. "You shouldn't have to do this for me. I don't deserve it." He finally looked at her, tired and sincere. "You keep saying that. You ever think maybe I need saving too?" The words hit her harder than the gunfire. She sat down across from him, the chair creaking. "You don't need saving. You chose this." He shook his head. "I didn't choose you out of pity, Maddie. I chose you 'cause when I found you, for the first time in a long while, I wanted to live for something again." Tears filled her eyes, spilling down before she could stop them. "You make it sound like I'm worth all that." "You are," he said simply. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Caleb stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her. He didn't touch her. Not yet. Just stayed close enough that she could feel he was there. After a while, she spoke, voice muffled. "I still see him when I close my eyes. My husband. The cellar. The fire. It never stops." "I know," Caleb said softly. "You can't bury ghosts. You just have to live louder than they whisper." She dropped her hands and looked at him, eyes red, face raw. "Ow!" He smiled faintly. "By breathing. By waking up every day and choosing not to quit. By sitting here right now, talking to me." She gave a wet laugh that broke into a sob. "That's not much." "It's enough," he said. "It's more than you think." He reached up, slow and careful, and touched her face. She didn't flinch this time. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "You ever think maybe we were both just trying to find a reason to keep going?" She nodded slowly. "And did we?" He hesitated, then said, "Yeah, I think I did." For a long time, neither of them moved. The sound of the wind outside filled the room like breathing. She leaned forward then, resting her forehead against his. The closeness scared her, not because it felt wrong, but because it felt safe. When she spoke again, it was barely a whisper. "You think peace ever lasts?" "Maybe not forever," he said, "but long enough to matter." She smiled through tears, and for the first time, she kissed him, soft, trembling, real. He didn't pull her closer, didn't rush it, just let it be what it was, a moment that finally didn't hurt. When she pulled back, she looked down, embarrassed. "I don't even know who I am anymore." He smiled gently. "You're the woman who walked through hell barefoot, and still had the strength to knock on my door. She laughed, weak but true. You always know what to say. He stood, helping her up with a hand that had done too much killing and too little kindness. Come on, he said. Sun's up. Let's see what's left of the fence. Outside, the morning light stretched across the land. The horses grazed near the water trough, the air cool and clean. Maddie breathed deep, the smell of dust and sage filling her lungs. For the first time in years, it didn't burn. Caleb fixed a loose rail while she stood beside him, quiet. After a while, she said, "If they come again, I'll fight too." He looked at her, half smiling. "You don't have to." She met his eyes. "I know, but I want to." Something in him softened then. Not pride, not relief, something simpler. He reached out and took her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. They stood there, looking out over the desert, two broken souls who decided to stop breaking. When the wind rose again, it carried the smell of lavender from inside the cabin. Faint but still there, like a memory that refused to fade. Caleb squeezed her hand once. "Guess we're still standing," he said. She smiled, a quiet strength in her voice. "Then maybe that's enough." And for that moment, under the wide, endless sky, it truly was. The sky was wide and empty the next morning, the kind that made sound feel smaller. Maddie stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. Caleb was out by the barn, fixing a loose hinge. The desert stretched around them in all directions, open and quiet, too quiet. She had been trying to pretend things were normal again. Bread in the oven, laundry on the line, a book she'd started reading by the fire, but hadn't touched since the gunfight. But pretending didn't make the air lighter, and it didn't make her hands stop shaking at night. Caleb came up the path, wiping sweat from his neck. He noticed her blank stare. "You okay?" She forced a small smile. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit," he said with a faint grin. Her laugh was weak, but it was real. "Do you ever feel like peace is just another lie?" He stopped, watching her closely. "Sometimes, but I'd rather live in a lie that lets me breathe than the truth that buries me." She looked down, rubbing the rim of her cup. "I don't know how to breathe without waiting for something bad to happen." Caleb sighed and leaned on the porch rail beside her. "That's the thing about bad. It don't need an invitation. But neither does good." She glanced at him, a ghost of a smile in her eyes. "You always make it sound simple." "It ain't simple," he said. "It's just worth trying." Before she could answer, they both heard it. The sound of hooves again, faint but certain, coming from the east. Caleb straightened, his expression tightening. Maddie's heart dropped. Two riders this time, moving faster than the last. Caleb reached for the rifle resting by the door. Maddie grabbed his arm. "Wait, please." He turned to her. "We don't know who they are." Her voice shook. "Then ask before you shoot." He hesitated, then nodded once and stepped off the porch. The riders slowed as they neared, one older, one young, both wearing dusty coats and badges on their chests. The older one tipped his hat. "Morning. Name's Marshall Lang. We're looking for a woman. Name might be Maddie Price." Maddie's stomach turned to stone. Caleb stood his ground. "Ain't no one here by that name." Lang looked past him toward the cabin. "Mind if I ask who's inside?" Caleb's tone stayed even. "My wife." The younger, Marshall frowned. "You get married, Boone? Thought you were done with people." Caleb didn't blink. "Guess I changed." Lang studied him for a long time. "We heard some riders came this way last week. 3 men, bounty hunters. Didn't make it back to town." Caleb said nothing. Lang's eyes softened just slightly. "I don't care about bounty hunters, but the sheriff's been asking questions. You know how folks talk." Behind them, the door creaked. Maddie stepped out, pale but steady. "It's me," she said. "I'm the one you're looking for." Caleb turned, disbelief in his voice. "Maddie." She shook her head. "I'm done hiding." Lang took off his hat, respectful. "Ma'am, you know what I gotta do." "I know," she said quietly, "but I need to tell him myself. Not let someone else twist it again." She looked at Caleb, her voice trembling. "I can't live free if I'm still running." Caleb's jaw clenched, pain cutting deep through his eyes. "You don't owe them nothing." "I owe myself the truth," she said. Lang gestured toward the horses. "You'll come peaceful?" Maddie nodded. "I will. Caleb stepped between them. If you take her, I'm going too. Lang hesitated, then nodded. Fine, but it's a long ride. As they mounted up, the sun started sinking low, painting the desert red. Caleb rode beside her, his hand brushing hers once. You sure about this? He asked quietly. She looked ahead, the horizon glowing like fire. No, but I'm sure about you. The marshal led the way, and the sound of hooves echoed across the endless plain. Dust rose behind them, and the cabin grew smaller and smaller until it was nothing but a shadow in the light. That night, they made camp by the river. The marshals sat apart, talking low. Maddie sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and Caleb sat beside her. You think they'll hang me? She asked softly. He looked at her, eyes full of something unspoken. If they do, they'll hang what's left of a ghost, not the woman I see sitting here. She turned to him, her lips trembling. What do you see? He smiled, sad and honest. A woman who walked through hell and still had enough heart left to love again. Tears slid down her cheeks. I don't deserve you. He shook his head. You don't get to decide that. The wind whispered through the grass, soft and cold. Maddie leaned against him, eyes closing. If they take me tomorrow, he cut her off gently. Then I'll wait, however long it takes. She smiled faintly. You always keep your word, don't you? Only when it matters, he said. And that night, under a sky full of stars, the world felt both cruel and kind, as if it couldn't decide which it wanted to be. The town of Abilene looked smaller than Maddie remembered from years ago, but the sound of it still made her chest tighten. Boots on wood, doors slamming, the dull murmur of gossip that could kill faster than a bullet. The marshal rode ahead, leading them through the main street as people stopped to stare. Caleb stayed close beside her, every muscle in his body tense. At the sheriff's office, Lang helped her down gently. You sure you want to do this? He asked. Maddie nodded. I'm tired of running from something I already survived. Inside, the room smelled of paper, tobacco, and old guilt. The sheriff, an older man with weary eyes, looked up as they entered. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. They said you were dead. Maddie stood tall. I was. He studied her face for a long moment, then said quietly, Tell me what happened. So she did. She told him about the cellar, the beatings, the years spent praying for mercy that never came. She told him about the night of fire and the way freedom had felt like dying all over again. Her voice didn't break until she said, I didn't kill him to live. I killed him to stop dying. The sheriff didn't interrupt. When she finished, the room was silent except for the slow creak of his chair. Finally, he said, The law is supposed to protect people like you. Caleb spoke then, his voice low. Supposed to. Lang shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff, after all this time. The old man waved a hand. Ain't no jury gonna hang her for surviving. I'll write it down as self-defense. Case closed. Maddie's lips parted. That's it. He nodded. You've done your punishment already. I can see it in your eyes. She stood there a moment, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. Then she said softly, Thank you. When they stepped back outside, the sun was high, blinding. Caleb exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Maddie turned to him, voice barely steady. It's over. He looked at her for a long time, then smiled, small but real. Yeah, guess it is. They didn't go back to the cabin right away. They stayed in town a few days, sleeping in a small inn above the stables. The first night, Maddie couldn't stop crying. Not from fear, but from the strange weight of being free again. Caleb didn't try to stop her. He just sat close, hand resting near hers on the bed, letting her breathe through it. By the third morning, she woke to find him sitting by the window, watching the sunrise. The light touched his face in that quiet, holy way that made everything else fade. You thinking about going back? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, the land still needs tending. Always does. She smiled softly. Mind if I come with you? He turned, and there was something in his eyes, a piece that had been missing for years. Wouldn't make sense without you there. They rode back together, the wind warm against their faces, the road stretching endlessly behind them. The cabin looked just the same when they arrived, small, weathered, waiting. Maddie stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Everything smelled of dust and lavender. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sunset turn the desert to fire. Maddie leaned against his shoulder. "You think people ever really change?" she asked. Caleb thought about it. "No," he said finally. "I think they just remember who they were before the world broke them." She smiled, resting her head against him. "And who were we?" He looked out across the endless sand. Two broken souls that didn't stay broken. For a while, neither spoke. The wind moved through the grass, soft and forgiving. Somewhere, a coyote cried, but it sounded less like sorrow and more like song. As the light faded, Maddie whispered, "I used to think freedom was just being alone. Now I think it's being seen and still being loved anyway." Caleb looked at her, his voice rough but gentle. "Then you finally found it." She smiled, eyes glistening. "No, we did." He reached over and took her hand. Their fingers fit like they'd always belonged that way. The horizon swallowed the last of the sun, leaving only the two of them and the desert, and the sound of peace that no one could take away. Moral: sometimes redemption doesn't come from running, fighting, or forgetting. It comes from facing the past with open eyes and finding someone who chooses to stay anyway. We don't get to choose what breaks us, but we do get to choose what we build after.